there's a lot of talk about there's a mental health crisis amongst the young people in the world. And I'm not sure how I feel about that. And this is not to denounce or to minimize what people are going through. But I wondered, are these folks indeed meeting clinical criteria for mental health disorder? Or are they responding to, frankly, the hellhole that the world is? Welcome to Awake at the Wheel. So in our episode today, we're going to be discussing the fact that words have meaning. I know this is a topic that is important to both Oren and I, and I'll say this because one of my earliest interactions with Oren was at work, and I received an email from him with some corrections as far as grammar and punctuation. And rather than being offended, I was like, this is my kind of person, because clearly language is as important to him as it is to me. And that was one of our, I think, first chuckles that we shared. So within the context of our podcast, we've been discussing a lot about weaponization and divisiveness and shutting down conversations and shutting down meaningful discussions and lack of critical thinking. And a huge piece of this is the fact that words are being misused, words are being weaponized, and essentially words are being thrown out there to shut down discussion. So some of these words that we're going to be discussing today are calling someone a racist, calling someone a fascist, calling somebody a sexist, in the face of a meaningful discussion and a topic that should be discussed. And we'll also touch on, in our profession, sometimes social media tends to misuse clinical terms and clinical words, which can also lead to some problems. So, Oren, what are your thoughts on this?
Well, speaking of words and having meaning, I am anal about language. And so I say that, yes, we are what we speak. So if we're being taught that either certain words have certain meanings, or if we are programmed to be vague, to be ambiguous in our language, we're not doing a service to anyone. We need to have a shared language. We need to make sure that when I say one thing, you hear that word and you understand it to mean the same thing. Otherwise, how can we exist as social animals? We have to have a common ground. And that common ground is language and what the words or the terms mean.
Absolutely. So that being said, language certainly does change and evolve over time. And, there's slang terms and hyperbole and so on and so forth. But these, at the end of the day, are still all nuances of language. But the misuse of language is a big problem. And again, back to words like calling someone a fascist or a racist, it's doing a few things. First of all, it's erroneous. It's awful to call somebody these things in the face of a desire to have a real discussion. But what it also does is the opposite of what I think such people are seeking to accomplish, which is remove the true power and charge and importance and complexity of those themes and words.
Well, yeah, I mean, basically, when someone does use one of these words, there's only one purpose. It's to shut down the other person or to shut down the discussion. That's control. It's an abuse of control. It's an abuse of power, because nobody wants to be called that word, whether it's just simply that it feels so toxic to them and it's like anathema to them, or they understand the optics of that if I am, considered to be a person like that, what is that going to do to me? So when people use these words recklessly, again, first of all, it means that they don't have a good argument. It means they don't have a good handle on the situation. It means that they are not psychologically, emotionally, or cognitively capable of having a nuanced, good faith, balanced, comprehensive discussion on the topic. That's what it really means. Now, you and I are trying to be positive in our podcast. We're trying to help promote change, positive change. And so if anything I say sounds harsh, condemnatory, dismissive or something like that, I'm not trying to be a jerk. I'm trying to be honest about what I have seen happen as an instructor, as a psychologist and as somebody who, until I was canceled, was pretty prominent in the media and social media. And so I've seen all this.
Hmm.
I've had it happen to me numerous times.
Yeah. So as far as a couple of things, I want to talk about you being canceled because I think that that's an important thing for us to discuss and the consequences that come from that. But also as far as its use of language to shut down conversations. I wonder if it comes from ignorance and not having enough information or ability to carry the conversation on whatever the given topic is, or is it fear, or is it both?
Yeah, I would say it's both at least. There's others as well, but the fear is huge. And I always tell people if I ask them like, "What's the most important emotion?" People will often say love or something. I say, no, it's fear. Fear has more of an influence on people's behaviors or lack thereof than anything
Yeah.
else. People are more driven to avoid that which they fear, that which makes them uncomfortable, that which they don't feel prepared to handle. Than they feel driven to challenge, to take on things, to to go into the unknown. So to face the discomfort that comes with all these things. So yes, a lot of it is fear. There is ignorance. There is a belief. Here's the problem: a belief that what they are doing is virtuous. It's just. It's for a greater good. And this is where, when we talk about words having meaning, it's they don't understand when people again use words like fascist, racist, whatever, recklessly and inappropriately. They are rationalizing, and I've used this word in numerous podcasts, but just in case anyone doesn't know, to rationalize is to make a bad or cheap or excuse for why you do or don't do something. And it makes you sleep at night, but everybody else recognizes what you're doing. And so they rationalize their behaviors and they say, no, the person that I've just called a fascist is dangerous. I need to shut them down. I cannot let them
Hmm.
speak. I cannot let them hurt others. So I am actually protecting society or protecting
Right.
this person or this group. And it's just they're lying to themselves because they're not doing that, because you never do good when you prevent other people from talking. Now, if that person's a monster, then maybe you don't let them talk. The problem is words have meaning. And so now everyone's being called a monster if their views, if their opinions, if their ideas, if their suggestions don't run in accord with what you want to believe or need to believe.
Yeah. So I don't want to get into the details about the why of being canceled, but I think what's really important here is, the highlights of you said something that someone didn't like and you get canceled. Talk about being the recipient of that, because I don't believe that, people who are going around pointing fingers and using these really strong words understand that the recipient of it is a human being that has real consequences from it.
Well, fortunately, just because I've lived a pretty diverse life, and I am resilient, I have a very thick skin, and I've been able to overcome a lot of adversity in my life, which this is going to sound cheesy, but being a white, straight, non-transgender male, people can't
Hmm.
believe that I would have it. Well, I do, and I did,
Sure.
and
Yeah.
right. So fortunately, I was raised in a way that enables me to have a really thick skin and to be able to continue to move forward despite that. However, the vast majority of people, either who are canceled, whether it's publicly like I have been, or at work, or among their group and so on, most people don't have that perspective that I have, and it is devastating. They are real human beings, and they've watched their friends disavow them. They've watched their
Hmm.
job be taken away. They've watched, their reputation be completely smeared, sometimes publicly, and it cause. So it's two things: either it happens to the person, and it can be devastating for many people, or the fear of that happening when you see some people, whether it's let's say a professional in a certain field who's the top of their field and they've been canceled, or someone at your work or a neighbor, when you see that happen, that's like a spike. That's like a head on the spike. Okay, you just gone into a village and you see all these heads on spikes, and that's a warning. And people don't want to ever have, they don't want to have their head on that spike. So it causes a lot of anxiety. They're terrified of saying or doing the wrong thing and being labeled a certain way. And it's not hyperbole. It's not some myth. It's a fact. And many people, I've had so many patients who've said that. And again, it's if it hasn't happened to them yet, the fear of it happening is all encompassing and it prevents them from either being able to speak their mind, from being able to do their job properly, from being able to parent properly, or from having good mental health, because constant anxiety and fear and hypervigilance is not healthy.
Absolutely. And that leads to the next piece of this. You're mentioning that this causes anxiety. And that is certainly the proper framing of it. But we're living in a world right now where, you know, TikTok and all kinds of different videos that are out there where lay people, are discussing things like anxiety, like ADHD, like OCD, and these are becoming pieces of and parts of regular colloquial language where people are misusing these words. So, for example, saying, I'm very particular about something, that's my OCD, or I have a hard time focusing, therefore I have ADHD. So this is another bastardization of language where there's these serious implications of these disorders and terms that are being thrown around.
And I'm going to throw one more word just to shift gears, but I'm going to keep the theme that you just mentioned, which is rape, sexual assault,
Yeah.
okay, violence. So, two things. When you are accused of that, or you're afraid that you could be accused of that, wait, we just had a great time last night. It was consensual. We were sober, whatever. And then knowing, and I've had a lot of young men say this, and as someone who's taught human sexuality for the past 20 years, I've seen this happen. I've had patients, I've had students who've had this happen to them, where knowing that if the person regrets what happened, or if you thought it was just a simple hookup and the person wanted more and you're not giving them more, knowing that they could turn around and say, I was raped or sexually assaulted or coerced. All right. That those words do have consequence. It causes the anxiety before and after. It can cause someone to lose their freedom. Right. So either it's having an actual practical implication, an impact that is it's evil when it's a false allegation, right? Or it's making the person who's making that allegation feel that they were actually subjected to something horrible. And so we know about the
Hmm.
placebo effect. If someone
Yes.
is told, right, if someone is told that even if it was consensual, again, I'm using sexual assault, but I just want to go there because that's something I've seen happen many times. I see the impact on both sides. If someone is told that, if again you thought it went really well, everything seemed great, but then things subsequently don't turn out to the way that you want it, if you're told that equates with sexual assault, psychologically you are putting yourself in a victimized mentality, and you are limiting yourself, and you are carrying mental health impact that could actually that maybe equivalent or almost equivalent to somebody who truly was sexually assaulted. And
Hmm.
then the final point
Hmm.
of that is, when people who actually have been sexually assaulted, when people have been the victims of racism, when people have been the victims of violence, when people do have OCD or ADHD or bipolar disorder or
Hmm.
whatever, when they hear other people using language to co opt their experience, it is a slap in the face. It's
Yes.
insulting, and it makes them, it cheapens their own experience, and that's what
Yeah.
people have to recognize. There are so many consequences to using language recklessly, and I'm going to say narcissistically, and I'm using this properly, because if someone
Hmm.
believes that I can dictate everyone else's reality, I can use language that works for me idiosyncratically. It may not accord with objective reality, but because it feels that way to me, I can say that without any consideration of the consequence, or the impact on other people. What is that if not narcissism?
Yeah. Yeah. And one of the big challenges or consequences of, again, the misuse of clinical terms is that and you've alluded to this, it's confusing then to, I think, the masses in general, whether they're somebody who is suffering from that disorder or not. It removes the importance and power of that word, and it gets diluted, I suppose, is what I'm saying. When we look at society right now, there's a lot of talk about there's a mental health crisis amongst the young people in the world. And I'm not sure how I feel about that. And this is not to denounce or to minimize what people are going through, but I wondered, are these folks indeed meeting clinical criteria for mental health disorder? Or are they responding to, frankly, the hellhole that the world is in some respect, right? It could even be a natural response to the challenges that are happening in the world around us. That's not disordered anxiety. That's a stress response.
Right. And yeah, and it's tricky, because the fact is, if you put 100 people in the same situation, they're going to process it differently. And how do they process it? Well, hey, I'm going to tell you, it's language in part. So there may be an actual crisis going on. There may be catastrophes on the horizon. There may be, but the word that we use to describe that, the words that we use to describe our ability to deal with it, or our role in maybe making change or trying to withstand it or whatever, those words again do have impact. So regardless of what the reality is, if people are using the wrong language or disempowering or harmful language
Hmm.
to describe that situation, it's going to only make it worse. And that's what we have to be careful about. So you're absolutely right. It's hard to know how much of it is a disorder and how much of it is a stress reaction to a reality. But again, it's how you frame it. It's how you frame it that will help determine the outcome in yourself. And that's why with trauma, for example, we know that again, 100 people in the exact same potentially traumatic incident or experiencing that same incident, not everybody is going to suffer. Not everyone's going to have post-traumatic stress disorder. It's part of it's biological, it's part of it's genetic, part of it's your history, but also part of it is how it was framed, either by yourself or by other people around you. Okay, so if people are more mindful of the language that they use, if people are more mindful of how they frame their experiences, and if they see that there's ways to use different words to reframe the experience in a more adaptive way. I'm not saying to rationalize, I'm not saying to lie to yourself. I'm saying to try to find the most adaptive way to, again, to frame it. I'm going to keep using the word frame in this case, and framing is through language. Right? It's not through feelings, it's through language, how you describe it, where you choose to focus on. That is going to help you get through whatever situation. And people need to be, because people need to be more focused on that, because you have control over the language that you choose to use. So even if the Amazon is burning, even if war is breaking out over here or there, I have no control over that, but I do have control over the words that I choose to use, or where I decide to focus my attention. I can say, you know what, I know that this is going on here. I have it. I'm going to try to compartmentalize. I'm going to try to focus on something else that I can actually do something about in my own life, and that will help my mental health. And again, all of this, we need words to describe what I just mentioned. So, really being mindful of the words. And if I may just use one, if I may just point this out here, because this is going to resonate with some people. And
Hmm.
so if I have a patient, all right, if I have I'm going to say two things if you don't mind going into instructor mode. Sorry.
Of course.
So if I have a patient and within the first 5 minutes, I hear this word used several times, I know several things about them. And I point out to them and I say to them, I say, from now on, your homework is I want you to just monitor how often you use this particular word. It's like a set of 3 or 4 words. And I've never had someone not come back and say, oh my God, I had no idea. And those words are, for example, stupid, silly, ridiculous, right? When they're saying,
Hmm.
oh, I'm so silly, or I have this stupid idea. I know it sounds ridiculous, but, and if I hear them saying over and over, I know that that's the narrative going on in their back of their mind. That's the language that they are using for themselves. They are denigrating themselves. They are
Hmm.
dismissing their ideas. They're devaluing themselves. And if you do that constantly, first of all, you weren't born that way. You picked up something that you were hearing when you were younger, usually your parents. It could be a teacher or whoever, but
Right.
the fact is you've now conditioned yourself to think that way. So if you talk that way, you think that way, you feel that way. And someone who's stupid, silly, ridiculous, you can't have good mental health if that's how you feel about yourself. You can't have a sense of self agency and saying, I can make these changes, I can do this and that, right? So being mindful of that kind of language, it's amazing. And if you just make some changes, it can change, just changing in your language. It changes how you think
Hmm.
about things. It changes how you feel about yourself. And if I can just use one other language, just before I forget, in therapy, I tell my patients, and this, I tell them, I say, it's colloquially speaking, if you do this in a normal situation, it's perfectly fine because we all do it. But in therapy, it has a very different meaning, and that's using the pronoun you. So if I say, if I said to you, when you go to a bar and you meet your friends, and then the bartender comes to you and they say, okay, right, you're using you, because you're trying to make it kind
Yeah.
of like a general experience. It's a universal you, so that it draws the person in and a shared experience, whether they've actually had that experience or not, right? But in therapy, I explain to people that using you is basically emotionally distancing yourself from the experience. You're making it abstract. It's some concept. It's not your own experience. So I've had people say literally, when you wake up this morning and brush your teeth at 8:35, and it's like that's the person who's not able to own their experience, and they have to
Hmm.
use you to distance themselves. It shows that they're not processing, right? So the reason I'm bringing this up is these are just two examples of tendencies that people have. And by the way, once I tell people that you can't not see it when other people talk. Once again,
Yeah.
when you talk about you like a fun situation, that's fine. But when you hear them talk about a very personal, direct situation, and they're using you can see them that they really are trying to avoid the discomfort of owning their
Absolutely.
experience.
Yeah.
So I just want to throw that
Yeah.
out there as a tip, for what people can do.
Certainly. Yeah, and if I can go back to what you were saying earlier, as far as the narrative that we tell ourselves, if I keep saying in the background, I'm stupid, I'm dumb, I'm useless, whatever the case may be, we then begin to internalize and believe that to be true. Uh, but it's important for us to also look at what's happening with this misuse of language externally and how we then internalize it. So, for example, and again, I will speak generally here about this client because I don't want to, reveal anything personal, but I've become aware of a situation where a child was suspended from school for using a previously harmless name of an animal, which was then inferred as this child being racist. So my task then was to work with this individual who came into the office literally thinking that he's racist. So having this discussion with I'll say 8-year-old child of I'm a racist person, and then having to undo that narrative or at least help inform what racism actually is. My gosh, difficult, harmful that that's happening. And I think a perfect example of the real consequences and what's going to be the long term consequences of this misuse of words.
Exactly. And when you do this to a child, when you have a child who, and let's just assume that the child had no bad intention, and you're telling them it doesn't matter what your intention was,
Mhm.
you are a bad person. That's very different from saying, we know you have good intentions, but you use language in a certain way that can be harmful or hurtful
You
to
said
some
a bad
people. So
word, and yeah,
exactly. And again, it goes back to language. It's just like with children. You can say you were bad or you did a bad thing. Those are two very different things. One, a
yeah,
child recognizes, oh, my behavior was not acceptable. The other is, I am a terrible person. They can develop into that.
right.
So yes, so we are seeing so much language, and we've talked about this in other podcasts. But I hate to say it, very many young children are being taught that just because of the color of their skin, they are bad, they are deficient, they are the source of problems in the world.
Hmm.
And these distortions and bastardization and just evil manipulation of language is having a
Yeah.
lot of negative consequences. And for someone to say, well, now they know how other people feel, this is a child. This is a child who maybe
Hmm.
did
Hmm.
nothing wrong. Why are you going to saddle them with the
Yeah.
burden of your neuroses?
Yeah. Yeah, so like always in every episode, let's look at what can we do about this because I surmise that this isn't going anywhere. In fact, to be a little bit pessimistic here, I imagine it's going to get a little bit worse because we're seeing it right now. Words are losing meaning. Um, what can we as individuals do? What can we as a society do?
So, as an individual, we need to recognize again, we are what we speak. We need to be more mindful of the words that we use. We need to question when we see these changes. You can't say this word because, wait a second, 5 seconds ago, it was acceptable. Why are you suddenly saying it's not acceptable? So instead of just blindly going, oh, no, no, I don't want to offend somebody, so I'm not going to use this word, you can choose not to use the word because you're being told either A, it's hurtful or offensive, or B, you don't want to lose your job or get sanctioned some way. So you can do that,
Hmm.
but don't do it blindly. Question, why am I being asked to use this different language if necessary? Number one. Number two, If you think it's wrong and you feel, principled enough to stand up to it, and you feel that you're in a position where you can do that, challenge. Ask them why exactly. Ask someone to Google it. Tell them, look at the etymology of this word. Tell me how it came to be suddenly wrong. Tell me why you're saying, for example, let's just use racism. I know that there are many people who are taking this definition, but this is a relatively new definition that someone cannot be racist unless they have the position of power in the society, for example. And I challenge people. I say that's just a convenient excuse to allow people who don't happen to be in the majority to be
Hmm.
terrible people. Okay, right?
Yeah.
I can use prejudice, I can use bigot, but I'm also going to use racist or sexist or something else if you're acting that way, because I don't want you to feel that you can get away with, for being a bad person, for example. So it's truly doing your due diligence. We have social media, we have, look for credible sources, okay? Not not a biased source. As much as you can, look for credible sources. Look for 5 different sources from different places to try to get a good view, because maybe you'll realize, oh wow, I thought this was a stupid change, but I just recognized I didn't know the history of this word. Now I realize why some people find it very hurtful. And you know what? Why would I continue to use it if I know that? Like, so we need to recognize, again, you and I, we're always, it's a beer drinking game. We don't take a black and white approach. We take a critical
Yeah.
thinking approach. And a critical thinking approach says that in some cases, these language changes are ridiculous. In other cases, they're evil and manipulative. But in other cases, they are fair, they're rational, they make sense. And
Yes.
if I consider it, I can become a better person. I can contribute to a better society. So again, it's don't blindly accept something and don't blindly reject it. Do a deep dive,
Yeah.
do your
And
due
what I will
diligence.
add, yeah, absolutely. And again, like you said, critical thinking, looking at both sides of it, because there absolutely are examples of words that we shouldn't be using and have been removed from regular vocabulary, and rightfully so. Um,
Right.
a simple tool or technique that folks can use as well is just ask. If somebody calls you a racist or someone calls you a bigot and you know that this is not the case, in the spirit of meaningful discourse, say, well, what is it that you mean? And I think you'd be surprised, or folks would be surprised. See, I'm doing it right now. I'm saying you. I think one would be surprised in seeing what response someone will come up with. I think it would be one of many things that either freeze because they likely aren't often challenged. And my optimistic hope would be that it could lead to them perhaps realizing that that isn't the case, and that's a narrative that they've been fed and that they're feeding back in the feedback loop. The second thing I think that we can do about this, and I'll speak from the parenting perspective, is modeling proper use of language and modeling proper behavior. And of course, doing so in a respectful manner, but correcting children when you see that they're misusing such words. And again, whether it's the group of words we used earlier, talking within the clinical context, because a lot of younger people are starting to use those words erroneously, or when it comes to these social issues like racism, sexism, and so on, having a conversation with our kids, because they're the next generation that are going to continue on or break the cycle of language misuse.
Exactly. And that's so important. So many parents have abdicated the responsibility. They're like, what can I do? They have social media. And well, yes, they do, but you are the filter. You're the person who can help the child process what they're seeing so that they don't use language improperly. They don't absorb and internalize the language that's being used improperly against them. Don't just throw up your hands and give up. You are the parent. You're the one who, don't give it up to like, don't abdicate your responsibility to teachers or to social media or to peers. You have a role. And if you don't know what's going on, if you don't know the language your child's using, find out. Speak to the child. See what kind of videos they're watching. See what social media platforms they're using. Invest the time into recognizing what is my child being exposed to. Have those conversations. By the way, a little side note, what I used to do with my children when we used to watch TV, these days no one sits down and watches TV, right? But when we used to do that, I would sit with them, and in the commercials, I would have discussions with my children about the commercials, because for a period of time, I don't know now because I don't watch commercials, okay? But
Mhm.
there were so many mean-spirited, nasty commercials. Like, if you're selling a Subway sandwich or something, or tires, somehow the theme of that commercial, it was mean-spirited. It was harmful. It was like
Really?
ugly. Yeah, it was for a period of time, like, it was just so unnecessarily harsh or,
Hmm.
again, ugly. And so I would watch that with my children. I'd ask them what they think about that, and I'd tell them, like, I'd explain to them the psychology behind it and so on from a young age, because I
Yeah,
just didn't want them also just blindly accepting what they're seeing, whether it's from TV, from their friends, from their teacher. So, yes, whether it's language, whether it's an idea, whether it's, constructs, we want to help either our children or the people that we work with or peers or whoever else to be more mindful of this. And as you said a few minutes ago, asking questions. And by the way, if you find, here's the thing, I hope that people are not just going to dismiss somebody because they happen to be woke or they happen to be a social justice warrior or something like that. Okay.
right.
Maybe they have some value to bring. Maybe they have good ideas. Maybe they're executing it poorly, but they have a good heart and they have good intentions. So hear them out and don't just dismiss them. Have that discussion, like you said. Ask questions in good faith. And if you find that this person doesn't have the intention or the capacity to have a good faith, rational discussion with you, then you can respectfully, disconnect from them.
Hmm.
But you can also say, I'm not going to let that person's words have any impact on me. They have no credibility. If they're going to call me a racist, and I know I have not done anything racist, and whether this is a child or an adult saying this, like, if they're able to say, wait a second, that's not what I did. They can't read my mind. They can't ascribe to me
Hmm.
motives that I did not have. They don't know. This is a
Yeah.
projection of their own neuroses or own racism and sexism and so on. If you're able to do that, again, in good faith, okay, because if you're acting inappropriately, you're saying, "Well, that's just their projection." Well, now you're rationalizing. Now you're lying to yourself. If you're doing it honestly, again with good intention, good faith, then you will not allow the stench of people's misuse of language to cover you, and you can continue to try your best to have a positive influence or positive impact on other people. Model for them the type of behavior that we're trying to talk about right now.
Yeah, developing that thick skin, as you mentioned in the context of your situation.
Exactly. Right. Thick skin and also again goodwill and trying to again enter in and trying to see whether you can have a positive impact. And by the way, if you're using language properly, if you're trying to help somebody see things differently, maybe to abandon their wokeism or whatever else it might be, maybe you're not going to have an impact on them. And by the way, we're probably talking social media more so than face to face, but maybe you're
Yeah.
not going to have an impact on them, but you can have an impact on everyone else who's watching. Conduct yourself with decorum. Take the high
Yes.
road. Don't take cheap shots and let other people compare you versus the other person. The person who's trying to language police you or language tone you or trying to
Yeah.
gaslight you into believing that let them see how irrational and hateful they're being and conduct yourself properly and you're going to win somebody over who was maybe on the fence or who didn't realize, oh my gosh, I thought these people were virtuous. I thought they were doing good for society.
Hmm.
No, they're not. Right. And let
Yeah.
them figure that out. So anyway, that's how you can use language to your advantage.
Okay. So, like everything we talk about, this is going to pop up again throughout other podcasts, but I think it's so important that we spent this time identifying, what the problem looks like and what we can do about it.
Exactly. And I hope other people, again, we've given you some ideas. I hope people will look further into it. And I hope people will find the courage and the honesty within themselves to reflect on how you speak, how you think, and what changes can you make that are in your best interest. And therefore, if it's in your best interest, we hope that you can also then translate that into the best interest of the people around you or society, the broader society. So until next time, keep your eyes on the road and your hands upon the wheel.
As much as we love listening to ourselves speak, especially me, we would love to hear from you as well. So our emails are in the description below. If you would please write to us with your questions, feedback, comments, topics that you'd like us to cover. We can do this together, the two of us, but it's much better if we do it together. So we look forward to hearing from you, and we are going to have a segment called Rounds Table, where we're going to discuss the feedback and the questions and so on from our audience, and we will take it to the next level. We're going to help you be able to deal with some of these issues that you might be bringing us, or it's going to be a topic for us to explore together. And we really look forward to building a community of like-minded people who want to do right by others, not just for themselves.